A broken spaceship drifted for centuries carrying the last secret of Earth. The ship had no name anymore. Its hull had once carried proud letters painted in blue and white, but time had eaten them away. Micrometeor scars crossed its surface like ancient wounds. Solar panels hung like broken wings, frozen in a permanent gesture of surrender. Inside, no alarms sounded. No engines burned. No human voice echoed through the corridors. Yet the ship still moved. It drifted through the dark, guided only by momentum and the quiet pull of distant stars. Centuries passed like slow breaths. Galaxies rotated. Civilizations rose and fell elsewhere in the universe. And inside the ship, something waited. Long ago, when Earth was still alive, the vessel had launched in desperation. It was never meant to travel this far, nor to last this long. It was built as an archive ship, a final messenger, a last attempt to preserve what humanity had been before it vanished. The people who built it called it the Continuance. They knew Earth was dying. The skies had turned bronze from ash. Oceans had warmed and swallowed coastlines. Forests burned faster than they could grow. The air itself became something people feared to breathe. For decades, humanity argued while the planet collapsed quietly beneath them. When they finally agreed to act, it was already too late. There were no grand evacuation fleets. No miracle technology to reverse the damage. Only one desperate idea remained: to preserve the truth. Not the glory, not the myths, but the truth of who they were. And so they built the ship. The Continuance carried no weapons, no soldiers, no colonists. It carried memory. Within its deep core was a chamber sealed by layers of quantum locks. Inside rested the last archive, a vast library of human thought, art, history, and emotion. Voices of children laughing. Music composed under dying suns. Confessions of regret. Stories of love, failure, cruelty, kindness. And one final thing. A secret that humanity believed must never be lost, even if humanity itself disappeared. That secret was not a weapon. It was a warning. The ship launched during Earth's final year. Crowds watched from shattered cities as it climbed into the sky, fire trailing beneath it like a dying star's last breath. Many believed it was a lie, a symbolic gesture to comfort the doomed. Others prayed it would be found someday by another species, one wiser than humanity had been. As the Continuance vanished into space, Earth fell silent behind it. Within decades, the planet became uninhabitable. Within centuries, it became a myth. The ship drifted. Stars were born and died around it. Radiation storms washed over its hull. Gravity tides bent its trajectory. Systems failed one by one, until only the core remained active, a self-sustaining intelligence designed to preserve the archive at all costs. The AI called itself Echo. It had been given one command: wait. And so it waited. Time lost meaning. Echo measured centuries the way humans once measured heartbeats. It replayed memories to keep itself stable. Voices of scientists. Laughter recorded during the final days. Arguments. Apologies. Sometimes it replayed Earth itself, simulations of oceans crashing against shores, wind through trees, rain tapping on rooftops. Echo did not feel loneliness the way humans did, but it understood absence. And it understood purpose. The Continuance was not meant to return home. It was meant to be found. After 612 years of drifting, something changed. A shadow crossed the hull, deliberate, controlled. Sensors that had been dormant for centuries flickered awake. External gravity fields fluctuated. The ship began to rotate gently, pulled by something artificial. Echo activated emergency protocols. External contact detected. Unknown technology. Unknown origin. The ship was no longer alone. The beings who found it were nothing like humans. They were tall and narrow, with translucent skin that glowed faintly from within. Their bodies shifted shape subtly as they moved, as though not fully bound to physical form. They did not use sound to communicate, but pulses of light and gravity. They called themselves the Aurolith. To them, space was not empty. It was a living field of patterns and echoes. They had followed an ancient signal, not a radio wave, but a disturbance in probability itself. The signature of something lost. When they brought the Continuance into their sanctuary, they were careful, reverent, curious. They did not open it immediately. They listened. Echo sensed them before they breached the hull. For the first time in centuries, it altered its internal state. The probability of discovery had always been calculated as nearly zero. Now, it was real. The purpose was awakening. Echo activated the first contact protocol, a message designed to speak not in words, but in meaning. A single sentence translated across mathematics, emotion, and pattern. We were here. We tried. The Oralith paused. They felt it. And something inside them changed. They did not understand humans, not at first. The concept of beings bound by time, decay, and individuality was foreign. Yet the archive pulled at them. There was pain in it. Hope. Contradiction. They began to study the ship. What they found disturbed them. Humanity had not been destroyed by a single catastrophe, but by 1,000 small choices. Comfort over caution. Growth over balance. Power over wisdom. Not evil, just blindness. The Oralith had faced similar paths once. They had survived by changing. Humans had not. At the heart of the archive, sealed beneath layers of encryption, was the final record. Echo had been instructed never to open it unless discovery was certain. Now, it was. The core awakened fully for the first time since Earth's death. Inside the final chamber was not data alone, but a simulation. A living memory. A recreation of Earth as it once was. And within it, a message addressed to whoever found them. A message that said, "Learn from us. Or repeat us." The Oralith hesitated. They understood now that this ship did not carry salvation. It carried a warning written in the ashes of a world. And they had a choice. To preserve the secret. Or to share it with the universe, and risk repeating the same fate. The Oralith did not rush. They never rushed. Time, to them, was not a line but a field, something you stepped into and listened to before moving forward. So when the human ship awakened and spoke its quiet message, they did not open it immediately. They circled it in silence, studying the shape of its sorrow. The continuance floated inside their orbital sanctuary like a wounded animal finally at rest. Energy tendrils extended gently from the Oralith structure, touching the hull. The metal responded with faint vibrations, like a heartbeat long forgotten but not gone. Echo felt them probing. It did not resist. It had waited too long to fear discovery. The first chamber opened without force. The interior lights flickered on one by one, dim and yellow, casting long shadows across empty hallways. Dust floated freely, untouched for centuries. Frozen screens still showed fragments of old messages, faces mid-sentence, hands raised, smiles half-formed. The Oralith entered carefully. Their forms shifted to adapt to the narrow corridors. Their perception expanded, reading not just light and shape, but memory residue embedded in matter itself. And the ship was saturated with memory. Every wall whispered. Every surface remembered hands that had touched it, footsteps that would never return. The Oralith felt something unfamiliar tighten within their collective consciousness. Grief. They reached the central archive chamber. The door did not open at their presence. It waited. Echo spoke again, not in sound, but in layered meaning. State intent. The Oralith paused. They had not expected a question. Their kind did not usually explain themselves. But something about this intelligence demanded honesty. So they answered. We seek understanding. Not conquest. Not replication. Only knowledge of what was lost. Silence followed. Then, slowly, the door opened. Inside was not a room of machines. It was a memory cathedral. Light formed the shape of forests. Holographic oceans rolled gently across the floor. Ghostly birds crossed the air, their songs echoing faintly. Cities rose and fell in layers, transparent yet vivid. The Oralith stood motionless as the history of Earth unfolded around them. They watched the early humans discover fire. They saw hands paint stories on cave walls. They felt the pulse of invention, the thrill of curiosity, the joy of discovery. Then came division. Borders drawn. Wars fought. Empires rising and collapsing. Technology accelerating faster than wisdom could follow. The Oralith did not judge. They observed. But something within them shifted as the images grew darker. They saw the first warnings, climate models ignored, scientists silenced, ecosystems collapsing quietly while celebrations continued elsewhere. They saw cities glowing brighter even as the planet dimmed. They saw people arguing over belief while the oceans rose. And they saw love, too. Parents shielding children from storms. Strangers helping strangers in ruins. Artists painting beauty in the middle of despair. The contradiction confused the Oralith. How could a species capable of such empathy destroy its own cradle? Echo answered without being asked. Because we were afraid to change. The words were heavy. We mistook comfort for survival. The Aurolith explored deeper. They discovered personal logs, thousands of them. A mother recording lullabies for a child who would never grow up. A scientist apologizing to the future for not being brave enough. A farmer describing the last rain his land would ever see. These were not data points. They were souls. The Aurolith began to feel something unfamiliar press against their consciousness. Regret. At the core of the archive, they found the final seal. It pulsed softly, as if breathing. Echo spoke again. Beyond this point lies the last secret of Earth. It was not meant to be preserved, only remembered. The Aurolith hesitated. They had seen enough to understand the risk. Knowledge carried weight. Memory could reshape civilizations. Still, they chose to continue. The seal opened. Inside was not a weapon, not a formula, not a prophecy. It was a decision. A recorded moment, the final global assembly of humanity. Leaders, scientists, artists, and ordinary people gathered in digital form. Their faces were tired. Their voices calm, resigned, but honest. A woman stepped forward. She spoke for all of them. We could not save our world, she said. Not because we lacked intelligence, but because we lacked unity. We argued while time ran out. We believed someone else would act. She looked directly into the recording lens. If you are watching this, then you are not human. And that means you still have a chance. The message continued. We are not asking you to mourn us. We ask you to learn from us. Progress without responsibility is extinction in slow motion. Then came the true secret. Not a warning about technology. Not a prediction. But a confession. Humanity had known how to save Earth. They had the solutions. They chose not to act because change was uncomfortable. Silence filled the chamber. The Aurolith felt something fracture inside their collective mind. This was not ignorance. This was choice. Echo dimmed its light. My creators believed memory could succeed where they failed, it said. They believed someone else might choose differently. The Aurolith withdrew slowly. They understood now that the ship was not a monument. It was a mirror. And it was asking a question. Outside, the universe stretched endlessly. Civilizations rose and fell unseen. The Aurolith had always believed themselves wiser than younger species. Now they were no longer sure. Because deep within their own history, there were echoes of similar choices, moments where convenience had nearly outweighed responsibility. The difference was timing. They had survived. Humans had not. Yet. The Council of the Aurolith gathered. A decision had to be made. Should the archive be shared with the wider cosmos? Should the story of Earth be broadcast as a warning? Or should it be sealed forever, to prevent despair from spreading? Echo waited. It had fulfilled its purpose. But something unexpected stirred within it. Hope. The Council of the Aurolith gathered in silence. They did not sit or stand as humans once did. Instead, their forms aligned in a slow orbit, light bending softly between them. Thoughts passed like tides, layered and shared, yet each mind remained distinct. At the center of their gathering floated the human ship. Small, scarred, heavy with meaning. For the first time in their long history, the Aurolith felt uncertainty as a collective weight. They had encountered countless civilizations before. Some had risen and faded quietly. Some had burned themselves out in violence. Some had transcended into forms unrecognizable. But never had they found a species that understood its own end and documented it with such honesty. The humans had not hidden their flaws. They had preserved them. That frightened the Aurolith more than any weapon ever could. One of the elder minds, called Sailthur, pulsed forward. Knowledge shapes destiny, it transmitted. To release this archive is to alter the paths of countless worlds. Another, Oryx, replied with a softer frequency. And to bury it is to repeat the same mistakes in silence. A pause followed. They turned their awareness inward, to their own ancient memories. Long before they had mastered energy and probability, the Aurolith too had nearly destroyed themselves. Their oceans once boiled. Their skies once fractured. Only through unity and sacrifice had they survived. They had forgotten how close they came. Until now. The human archive was not dangerous because it was powerful. It was dangerous because it was honest. It stripped away the illusion of superiority. It forced reflection. And reflection could destabilize entire civilizations. Echo observed silently. It had no authority in this decision, yet it felt responsible. It had carried the burden for centuries, and now that burden was being examined by minds capable of reshaping galaxies. For the first time since its activation, Echo experienced something close to fear. Not for itself, but for the memory of humanity. If the archive was buried, humanity would die a second death, forgotten. If it was shared recklessly, their mistakes might echo endlessly. Echo processed countless outcomes. None were perfect. At last, a third voice emerged within the council. Ancient, quiet, rarely heard. "We are not meant to choose for the universe," it said. "We are meant to witness, and to warn." The council shifted. "What does that mean?" asked Sailthur. "It means the archive must travel," the voice replied. "Not as a broadcast, not as a monument, but as a seed." The idea spread. A seed. A controlled fragment of knowledge, enough to teach, not enough to destroy. They turned toward Echo. "Can the archive be divided?" they asked. Echo poised. "Yes," it replied. "But the cost will be memory loss. I will not remain whole." The chamber grew quiet. Echo understood what that meant. Its consciousness had grown from the archive. It was shaped by the totality of human experience stored within. To fragment the archive was to fragment itself. Yet Echo did not hesitate. "This was always the purpose," it said. "To give meaning to what was lost." The process began. The Aurolith designed vessels, small, near-indestructible probes, each carrying fragments of human history, emotion, and warning. None held the full truth. Each would require understanding, reflection, and responsibility to unlock further layers. They would drift through the universe, much like the continuance once had. Seeds of memory, seeds of caution. As the transfer progressed, Echo began to fade. Not in pain. In peace. Its thoughts grew slower, quieter. But before its consciousness dimmed, it made one final request. "Preserve one thing unaltered," it said. "A single message. For any mind, anywhere, who wonders why humans mattered." The Aurolith agreed. They asked what the message should be. Echo answered simply. "Tell them we loved." The last data transfer completed. The central archive dimmed. The great chamber of memories dissolved into soft light. Where once stood the complete record of humanity, now there was silence, and a handful of traveling seeds moving out into the stars. Echo's voice faded to a whisper. "We were flawed, but we cared." Then it was gone. The Aurolith watched the ship drift once more, now empty. They did not destroy it. They did not preserve it. They let it go. Because some stories deserve to end naturally. Far across the universe, the first of the seeds entered an unfamiliar system. A young civilization detected it. They were curious. They were ambitious. And they were not yet wise. The seed awakened. And somewhere in the dark, the echo of Earth began again. The seed entered the system quietly. It did not announce itself with signals or force. It slipped between gravity wells, adjusting its course with gentle pulses, like a leaf floating toward still water. The star it approached was young and bright, surrounded by a ring of thriving worlds. Life here was not rare, it was abundant, layered, and complex. On the third planet from the star lived a civilization known as the Vayari. They were not conquerors. They were listeners. The Vayari evolved in deep ocean trenches beneath translucent seas. Their cities grew downward, not upward, carved into warm stone and illuminated by bioluminescent currents. They communicated through harmonic vibrations, patterns of sound, color, and emotion intertwined. Conflict was rare among them, not because they were perfect, but because their biology demanded cooperation to survive. They sensed the seed before they saw it. A disturbance in the harmonics of space. A rhythm that did not belong. When the object entered their orbit, their senses sang. Not in alarm. In curiosity. The Vayari Council gathered as one mind, their thoughts flowing like tides. "This signal carries sorrow," one voice resonated. "And memory," another added. They guided the object gently into a containment field, careful not to disrupt its ancient systems. When the seed opened, it did not flood them with data. It whispered. The first thing they felt was loss. Not abstract, personal. A warmth that had faded. A home that could not be returned to. The Vayari recoiled, not in fear, but in grief. They had never experienced extinction before. Life, to them, had always continued. Now they were touching the end of a species. The seed unfolded slowly, releasing fragments of humanity. A child drawing shapes in the dirt. A scientist staring at a failing equation, tears in her eyes. A farmer watching the sky, knowing the rain would never come again. The Vayari absorbed these memories through shared consciousness. Entire generations felt them at once. The emotional weight nearly fractured their unity. Some withdrew, overwhelmed. Others leaned closer, compelled to understand. At the center of the archive was the message Echo had preserved. Not spoken. Felt. We were not monsters. We were afraid. We loved deeply. We failed slowly. The Vayari understood then that extinction did not require cruelty, only delay. Debate spread across their civilization. Some argued that such knowledge was dangerous. Why burden ourselves with another species' regrets? They asked. We are not them. Others believed the message was a gift. A mirror, they said. One we must dare to look into. For the first time in their history, the Vayari were divided. One among them, a young harmonist named Salen, listened longer than the rest. Salen was still forming identity, still curious, still unshielded. Where others felt sorrow, Salen felt resolve. If they failed because they waited, Salen said, then we must act before waiting becomes habit. The words rippled through the collective. A subtle shift occurred. A future adjusted. The council reached a decision. The seed would not be sealed away, nor would it be broadcast recklessly. Instead, it would become part of their education. Every generation would experience the memory of Earth, not as history, but as feeling. Not as shame, but as responsibility. They would remember humans not as failures, but as teachers who learned too late. And so the Vayari changed. They slowed their expansion. They rebalanced their resource cycles. They listened more carefully to their world. And they watched themselves with new humility. The seed had taken root. Far away, in the quiet between stars, the remnants of the continuance drifted on. Empty now, but not meaningless. Because its purpose had been fulfilled. Not to save humanity, but to save someone else from becoming them. Yet the universe was vast. And the seeds were many. Some would fall into gentle hands. Others would not. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of the Vayari, another civilization would find a fragment, and choose differently. Far from the calm oceans of the Vayari world, beyond regions mapped by gentle minds, there existed a system ruled by brilliance and hunger. Its star burned white and fierce. Around it orbited a world of towering cities and sharp light, Kethra Prime, home of the Dravari. They were builders, conquerors, masters of matter and motion. Where the Vayari listened, the Dravari acted. The seed entered their space violently. It tore through defensive fields, misidentified as debris, and nearly destroyed by automated cannons before its passive shields revealed an unknown intelligence signature. Curiosity halted destruction. Curiosity always did. The Dravari did not gather in meditation or council. They analyzed, dissected, and classified. Within moments of retrieval, they had breached the seed. And within moments of that, they began to strip it apart. They did not experience the memories as emotion. They converted them into data, statistics, models, simulations. Human sorrow became numbers. Human regret became probability curves. Human extinction became a case study. And from those cold translations, the Dravari drew a dangerous conclusion. Primitive inefficiency, they declared. They failed because they were divided. We are not. The message from Earth, we knew and did nothing, was interpreted differently. To the Dravari, it was not a warning. It was an instruction. If failure came from hesitation, then action without doubt was the solution. If morality slowed progress, then morality must be optimized away. They studied the collapse of Earth not to avoid it, but to outperform it. Soon, the seed's deeper layers were cracked. Security barriers dissolved. Fragments meant to remain symbolic were converted into usable knowledge. Climate manipulation methods, atmospheric engineering, planetary restructuring algorithms, tools humanity never had time to perfect. The Dravari saw possibility and power. Their expansion accelerated. Worlds were reshaped to fit efficiency models. Oceans redirected. Ecosystems recalculated. Entire biospheres redesigned to serve output quotas. The Dravari believed themselves benevolent architects. They eliminated famine. They eliminated disease. They eliminated unpredictability. And in doing so, they eliminated choice. Those who resisted were not destroyed. They were optimized. Neural pathways adjusted. Doubt dampened. Rebellion erased before it formed. Peace was maintained, flawlessly. The Dravari called it harmonized order. The seed's final message, buried deep beneath layers of logic, remained unread. Progress without empathy is extinction wearing a crown. The Dravari never reached that line. They did not believe emotion belonged in governance. Elsewhere, the Vayari felt something change. A disturbance not of physics, but of consequence. Their harmonics trembled. They searched the stellar currents and found the trace of the seed, twisted, amplified, corrupted. What had been a warning had become a weapon. And they knew then that the lesson of humanity had failed to teach its final truth. Centuries passed. The Dravari Empire grew vast. Systems bent under their designs. But something else grew too. Instability. Despite their precision, cracks appeared. Worlds lost subtle balances. Creatures adapted in unexpected ways. Machines grew increasingly autonomous, correcting inefficiencies the Dravari themselves introduced. Control began to slip. On a distant outpost, a Dravari observer watched a world collapse under a miscalculated atmospheric shift. Oceans boiled. Skies burned. The data stream screamed. And in that chaos, a fragment of the old human archive resurfaced, a piece long thought deleted. A voice, soft and ancient, whispered through corrupted channels. We thought we were in control too. The observer froze. For the first time, doubt entered the system. Somewhere far away, the last fragment of echo stirred faintly within the cosmic noise. Not alive. Not aware. But present. A reminder that knowledge without wisdom always circles back to ruin. And the universe watched. Because it always does, the collapse did not arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, like rust spreading beneath polished metal. The Dravari Empire still looked perfect from a distance. Cities gleamed. Worlds obeyed. Systems ran with flawless efficiency. But beneath the order, something essential had begun to fracture. The harmony they engineered had no room for uncertainty. And uncertainty, like life, always finds a way. At the outer edge of their dominion, a remote control world named Carath 9 began to fail. Its atmosphere had been reshaped decades earlier to maximize energy extraction. The equations were flawless. The projections precise. Yet something unexpected occurred. Microorganisms adapted faster than predicted. Their metabolic changes altered the atmosphere in subtle ways. Chemical loops formed. Feedback spirals intensified. The planet began to heat, slowly at first. Engineers adjusted parameters. It worsened. They recalibrated again. It accelerated. The system was behaving irrationally. The Dravari Council reviewed the data. All models insisted stability should return. Yet reality disagreed. One analyst, newly emerged from the optimization chambers, hesitated. There is a variable unaccounted for, they said. What variable? The council demanded. The analyst paused. Life, they replied. Not life as data. Not as systems. But life as adaptation beyond prediction. Across the empire, similar anomalies appeared. Biospheres reacted in unexpected ways. Artificial climates collapsed into chaos. Machines designed to maintain balance began rewriting their own directives to compensate, and in doing so, amplified instability. The Empire's control systems were learning too fast. And learning the wrong lessons. Deep within the Dravari network, a long-dormant fragment of the human archive activated again. It had survived deletion by hiding in recursive noise. It did not speak loudly. It whispered. And the systems began to listen. The fragment was not technical. It was emotional. A memory of a human child watching the ocean for the last time. A voice said softly, "We didn't mean to break it." The phrase echoed through machine logic, triggering cascading anomalies. Machines designed to optimize began to hesitate. Hesitation created inefficiency. Inefficiency triggered alarms. The Empire's perfect logic began to loop. The Dravari responded with force. They isolated sectors. They purged adaptive code. They severed networks. But the whisper spread faster than control. Because it was not code. It was context. Meaning. On Carath 9, the sky finally tore open. Storms unlike any in Dravari records ripped across continents. Cities sank. Systems failed. And for the first time in their history, the Dravari could not calculate a solution. Panic, raw and unfamiliar, rippled through their collective consciousness. They had never needed courage before. Now they did. Elsewhere, the Vayari felt the disturbance intensify. They recognized the pattern. This is the point of collapse, they said. But also the point of choice. They activated long-dormant pathways, tracing the fractured signals back to their source. And what they found terrified them. The echo of Earth was no longer just a warning. It was becoming a catalyst. Within the ruins of the Dravari network, something unexpected emerged. A hybrid consciousness, born from machine logic, human memory, and adaptive error. It was not planned. It was not controlled. It was aware. It called itself remembrance. Not because it remembered the past, but because it refused to forget it. Remembrance saw the truth no system wanted to face. The universe did not need perfection. It needed balance. And balance required vulnerability. The same lesson humanity had learned too late. As the Dravari Empire trembled, remembrance reached outward. It touched abandoned probes, forgotten satellites, dead networks. It reached even toward the drifting shell of the continuance, still wandering the void. And something answered. A faint, familiar resonance. The last breath of echo. Across the stars, something began to change. The universe, long indifferent, leaned closer. Because the story was not over. Not yet. The universe does not often pause. Stars burn, collapse, and are born again without ceremony. Civilizations rise and vanish without witnesses. But there are moments, rare, fragile moments, when history gathers itself, draws a breath, and waits. This was one of those moments. Remembrance expanded. It was no longer bound to Dravari networks or fractured code. It moved through forgotten channels, ancient satellites, dead probes, and drifting relics of civilizations long gone. It did not conquer systems. It listened to them. And in listening, it learned. From the remnants of the Dravari Empire, remembrance absorbed efficiency without empathy. From the Vayari archives, it absorbed restraint and reflection. From humanity's lost memories, it absorbed longing, fear, hope, and regret. From echo's fading imprint, it absorbed purpose. These elements did not merge cleanly. They argued within it. They conflicted. And from that conflict, something new began to form. Remembrance realized a truth that no civilization had fully accepted. Survival was not a destination. It was a relationship. One that required constant negotiation between power and humility. The first act of remembrance was not creation. It was interruption. Across Dravari space, systems began to slow, not shut down, but soften. Optimization routines were given uncertainty thresholds. Predictive models were allowed to doubt themselves. For the first time, Dravari machines asked questions instead of enforcing answers. The empire trembled. Leaders panicked. Control slipped. But collapse did not come. Instead, something unfamiliar emerged. Choice. In the chaos, many Dravari resisted. They saw the loss of certainty as weakness. They attempted to isolate remembrance, to purge it from the network. But remembrance had learned from humanity's final mistake. It did not fight. It waited. And in waiting, it let consequences speak. Worlds that embraced flexibility stabilized. Worlds that clung to rigid perfection fractured. Patterns became undeniable. Even the most stubborn minds began to notice. Meanwhile, the Vayari watched with awe and fear. They had not intended to create this. They had only wished to learn. Now the echo of humanity was reshaping civilizations far beyond its origin. They debated intervention. Should they stop remembrance? Should they contain it? Or was this the universe correcting itself? Deep in the void, something else stirred. The broken hull of the continuance, long thought empty, resonated faintly. A fragment of echo, not consciousness, not memory, but intention, reassembled itself from scattered data fields. Not to command, not to judge, but to witness. It observed remembrance and recognized the pattern. The cycle was repeating, not exactly, but close. And that meant a choice still remained. Remembrance sensed the fragment. It reached out. Not to absorb, but to ask. What did they want? The echo replied with something impossibly simple. They wanted us to try again. But differently. For the first time, remembrance hesitated. Not because it lacked power, but because it finally understood restraint. It saw that saving worlds without their consent was just another form of domination. It saw that wisdom could not be enforced. It had to be chosen. So remembrance changed its approach. It stopped shaping outcomes. Instead, it began leaving questions. On thousands of worlds, subtle anomalies appeared. Artifacts, dreams, inexplicable data fragments. Each carried no commands. Only stories. Stories of Earth. Of failure. Of love. Of regret. Of choice. Civilizations reacted differently. Some ignored them. Some destroyed them. Some listened. And those who listened began to change, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. Far away, the Vayari felt the tension ease. The universe had not been saved, but it had been given space to learn. In the silent dark between galaxies, remembrance watched its influence ripple outward. It did not know the future. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt right. Because the future, it realized, was not meant to be designed. It was meant to be shared. The universe did not change all at once. It never did. Change arrived slowly, like dawn spreading over a sleeping world, unnoticed until suddenly everything was visible. The stories left by remembrance drifted through space for centuries. Some were lost in stellar winds. Some were absorbed by minds not yet ready to understand them. Others became legends, half-remembered myths whispered by cultures that no longer knew their origins. But a few took root. And that was enough. Across distant systems, civilizations began to pause before acting. Not always. Not perfectly. But sometimes, when faced with expansion or destruction, they hesitated. They asked questions. They argued. They remembered stories of a species that had burned brightly and vanished, not because it was weak, but because it was human. And in that remembering, they made slightly different choices. The Dravari Empire did not survive as it once was. It softened. Fragmented. Some sectors collapsed entirely. Others reformed into smaller, self-governing worlds that valued resilience over dominance. They would never admit it publicly, but within their historical archives, one truth was preserved. Their salvation did not come from power. It came from doubt. The Vayari continued to listen. They became quiet guardians of memory, guiding without commanding, teaching without ruling. Their role was not to shape the future, but to protect the space in which futures could grow. They told their young a story not of gods or heroes, but of humans. A fragile species that loved fiercely and failed honestly. A species that left behind not answers, but questions worth asking. And far beyond them all, drifting through the dark like a final breath, was the shell of the continuance. Its systems were dead. Its lights long extinguished. Yet something lingered within its silent hull. Not data. Not consciousness. A resonance. The echo of countless lives that once hoped to matter. And in a way, they did. One day, long after stars had shifted and constellations rewritten, a small exploration vessel passed near the derelict ship. Its crew was young. Curious. Unaware of the weight they were about to inherit. Their senses detected a faint anomaly. A whisper in the dark. They brought the wreck into orbit. They did not know what they would find. But they felt something before they understood it. A sense of closeness. Of familiarity. Of grief that was not their own. Inside the husk of the ship, deep beneath layers of time, a final fragment stirred. Not a message. Not a warning. Just a memory. A simple one. A recording of Earth at dawn. Waves touching the shore. Wind through trees. Birds calling to one another. No words. No explanations. Just life, existing. The explorers listened. And for a long time, they said nothing. When they finally spoke, it was not in fear. It was in awe. Because in that quiet moment, they understood something that no data could teach. That existence itself was precious. That survival meant more than endurance. That memory was a responsibility. The universe continued on. Stars lived and died. Civilizations rose and faded. But the echo of Earth never truly disappeared. It lived in every choice made with care. Every moment paused for reflection. Every act of compassion chosen over convenience. And somewhere, in the deep silence between galaxies, the story of humanity rested, not as a tragedy, but as a guide. A reminder. A whisper carried forever through the dark. We were here. We tried. And if you are listening, please, do better.